Let's return to the October Revolution and
Yeah.
Lenin. What was the October Revolution? Who was Lenin? What are some interesting aspects of this human being and also this moment in history that stand out to you that are important to understand?
I think the interesting thing about Lenin is he was a zealot and he was a visionary and he really kind of meant it. And I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but Lenin also was someone who was strategic. So at a certain point when they were trying to advance communism throughout the Soviet Union and the costs were outweighing the benefits, he did a strategic retreat. He did the new economic policy. You had a rise of kind of these small capitalists coming back. You could hire people again. And for the hardcore people in the Soviet Union, hardcore communists, this was a huge betrayal. It's a step back. He didn't do it because he was some kind of crypto capitalist. He did it because he's like, all right, we know where we got to get to, but we have to go at a certain pace and we have to adjust as we go along. So to have someone who is that much of an ideologue and that much of a visionary, but still to have any element of pragmatism to him is, I think, a very rare combination.
And that pragmatism, do you think that's ultimately where things go wrong? Sort of, that's where you sacrifice the ideas.
Pragmatism is in this case was good because by taking a step back, he kind of gave himself some breathing room to allow the revolution to continue, to win the Civil War. There was a big moment where Germany, there's lots of like little funny anecdotes that I learned while researching this book. So, they were, Germany and Russia, they were negotiating a ceasefire because Germany wanted Russia out of the war. And basically Germany was like, all right, we'll let you leave, but you have to sign this treaty and basically hand over all this land that we're currently occupying. It was just parts of Ukraine, parts of Poland. And Lenin tells Trotsky to stall. He's just run the clock because he was of the belief that now that they've taken power in Russia, you're going to have a worldwide workers' revolution. So just stall them. And he stalled. And at a certain point, Germany's like, all right, you're signing this tomorrow or we're invading. And Trotsky basically said, yeah, so we're leaving the war, but we're not signing anything. And the Germans are like, what? And it's like, yeah, well, that's what we're doing. So, hey. And basically, eventually he had to sign the treaty and cede huge parts of land and a lot of money. And this was a very precarious moment for him to maintain control of Russia. And people were telling him, like, you've lost huge amounts of territory. You've blown it. You should be in jail. And he's like, watch your mouth. Because if you look forward to the future, it'll be clear which one of us is more likely to be the one ending up in jail. And he was absolutely right.
This was Trotsky or Lenin saying?
This was Lenin saying this to Karl Radek.
So who are these figures here? Who's Trotsky? Who's Lenin? Who's Stalin? What are some interesting aspects of all of this? Sort of just to linger on it, the personalities, the ideas that were important.
Well, Trotsky came late to Bolshevism. He was really the brains in many ways of the October Revolution. He was an amazing strategist. He never forgot that he was an amazing strategist, had a very high opinion of himself.
And by the way, the October Revolution, 1917, that's like a key moment. Of course, the Russian Revolution lasted a long time, but this was a key moment of a phase shift towards success of the Bolsheviks.
Well, that was the moment. That was like, all right, we are the government now. Yeah. And now we have to make like Thomas Jefferson said, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, or no, it's Ben Franklin, a republic, if you can keep it. It's like, all right, we've made our own kind of government if we can keep it, because that was the big question. You had an international blockade. You had the white armies, the Tsar's forces who wanted to restore Tsarism, or at least the parliament from right before Lenin took over. So this was a big kind of, in some ways, it was like the 2016 election. It's like, all right, we voted in Trump. Well, what's this going to look like? Like no one had any idea of what a Trump presidency was going to look like. All we knew was this guy's on Twitter running his mouth. He's insulting people, and he's had all these views. Some are over here, some are over there.
And the funny thing is, the Russians hacked both elections.
That's true.
See,
that's true. It was Putin and the Gremlin. So Trotsky was, Lenin's right-hand man, and he was, enormous. And to this day, he remains this kind of figure who is supposedly a less authoritarian anti-Stalinist version of communism that people can endorse. And Stalin, of course, was Lenin's successor. At first, there was a triumvirate running Russia as Lenin was recuperating from strokes. Then very quickly, not very quickly, but gradually, and then suddenly Stalin became an absolute dictator, and he had a series of purges and so on and so forth, which solidified his control over the country.
And of course, for Stalin, Trotsky later, but throughout, as you write, seemed to almost take on a supernatural character, wherein everything that went wrong in the USSR was due not just to his views, but to his direct orders from abroad. And of course, George Orwell brilliantly, in probably my favorite book of his, which is Animal Farm, and also 1984, portrayed Trotsky as Snowball in Animal Farm, and Emmanuel Goldstein in 1984 is this embodiment of this evil that we always have to be fighting. And you need that in order to hold on to power. You always have to have that enemy.
Right. So that's something I talk about in the White Pill as well. When things start going wrong, they always had to have scapegoats, right? And there's this Russian anecdote. What the Russians like to do is you can't say things out loud, but if you make jokes, you can say unspeakable truths. And there's this one anecdote where there's a Russian leader and things are going bad, and he looks in his drawer, and there were 2 letters from his predecessor. And he opens the first letter in a panic, and the letter says, for advice, and the letter says, blame everything on me. So he goes out there and he's like, oh, my predecessor sucked. He was terrible, blah, blah, it's his fault. And everyone's like, okay. And then there's a calamity again. And he's like, oh, crap. So he goes back at his desk and he reads the second one, and it says, sit down and write 2 letters. So when things start going wrong, as they constantly did throughout the history of the Soviet Union, or any, totalitarian, authoritarian country, someone has to be to blame. Since we know that our ideology is true and scientifically true, if it's not working in reality, given the perfection of the ideology, someone must be intentionally undermining it and causing the disconnect between thought and reality. And in the Soviet Union, it was the kulaks at one point, then it was the wreckers, the doctors. It was just different. There was always someone, and Trotsky was called a fascist and was accused of plotting with Hitler and all this other stuff.